Sean Diddy Combs has just filed a brand new bid to get out of jail before his sentencing in a few months. From arguing he shouldn't be locked up for his swinger lifestyle, to highlighting the atrocious conditions at the MDC, to addressing allegations of violence, he is fighting for his life in this new letter to the judge.
The courtroom was already full before the sun had fully risen. The air outside was cold, but the tension inside could have boiled it away. From the moment the heavy double doors opened, it was clear that today wasn't just another day in court. This was the day the world had been waiting for, the day when Sean Combs, aka Diddy, would learn his fate.
From his legal team, a brand new filing from his defense team arguing for why he should be released now, after that monumental verdict in his criminal case several weeks ago. The circumstances have changed, and I will tell you what. We did an interview a few weeks back that kind of previewed why and how Combs could be released. It was a bail bondsman that is apparently working with Diddy's team behind the scenes. I'm going to get to that a little bit later. But what I want to talk about right now is this latest letter from the defense to the judge overseeing this case, Judge Arun Subramanian. Remember, this comes after a jury of Combs' peers found him not guilty of racketeering conspiracy, not guilty of 2 counts of sex trafficking, but they did convict him of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. He's set to be sentenced on October 3rd. Technically, he could face up to 10 years in prison on each charge. Highly unlikely. I think maybe you might be looking at somewhere to 2 to 5 years potentially, but he could also get time served and be released, although that also seems unlikely. I'll talk about that a little bit later too. But initially, after the verdict, right after the verdict, his defense team petitioned the court that he should be released. He was just acquitted of some very serious charges. The judge denied it. The judge denied Combs bail once again. And remember, this comes after he was rejected bail multiple times since he was arrested back in September of 2024, highlighting the severity of the charges, the violence, and so forth. But now, this is different. Now, what is the defense arguing? I'm going to go over all this in the new letter. I'm going to give my take at the end about whether or not it's going to be successful and whether or not he will actually be released before sentencing in October. So, the defense begins by arguing that Sean Combs should be released in advance of sentencing, and the court has the power to do this. They have the authority, among other things, because you can clearly show, quote, that there are exceptional reasons why such person's detention would not be appropriate. So, what are those exceptions? What are those reasons? What are those circumstances that are exceptional? They highlight several things that we're going to get into. That the charges he was convicted of, we're going to call them the Mann Act violations. That's what it's called under the law. They're not as severe, they're not as egregious as other convictions in other cases. That the sheer fact that he's locked up at the MDC, the Metropolitan Detention Center, for the past 11 months, that in and of itself is a reason for him to be released. These are all exceptional circumstances, and I'm going to get into all the arguments. But first, they highlight the standard. And they argue that to be released under federal law, you need to show 2 conditions. First, the district court must find by clear and convincing evidence that the person is not likely to flee or pose a danger to the safety of any other person or the community if released. Second, it must be clearly shown that there are exceptional reasons why such person's detention would not be appropriate. Now, clear and convincing evidence is a lower standard, by the way. It's not like beyond a reasonable doubt. Anyway, basically, you have to show he's not a flight risk, he's not a danger, and you have to show there are particular, exceptional, unique reasons for why detaining Combs is wrong. We're going to start with the exceptional reasons justifying his release. And they begin by trying to define, well, what exactly is exceptional circumstances? What does that mean? And they argue that case law suggests a court has a lot of discretion to determine whether a particular set of circumstances qualifies as exceptions. And they say, look, Sean Combs, his case, so different from other ones. There has never been, according to them, a Mann Act prosecution like this one before. And this is how they lay it out. Quote, there has literally never been a case like this one, where
Reporters crowded the hallways, cameras poised like weapons, microphones extended toward anyone who looked like they might have a connection to the case. The smell of coffee and anticipation mixed in the air. Uniformed officers stood everywhere, at the doors and by the walls, posted near the gallery, making it impossible to forget that the man at the center of this storm was here not as a music mogul or fashion icon, but as a defendant facing years behind bars. When did he enter? He walked slowly, each step deliberate. His suit was flawless, his tie knotted perfectly, and his posture upright. On the surface, he still carried the image he had spent decades building: confident, powerful, untouchable. But if you watched closely, you could see the strain in his eyes. The way his lips pressed tight as if holding back 1,000 words he couldn't afford to say. This was not the stage he was used to. There was no music, no lights, no adoring crowd, only the unblinking gaze of the law. He took his seat at the defense table, his lawyers flanking him on either side. They shuffled papers and whispered in hushed tones, their faces composed.
Just denied bail. He was denied bail again.
He was denied bail again, and I watched. I actually learned that on your segment yesterday afternoon as I was sort of
Yeah, yeah.
doing my preparation for this. But we have to remember that one of the things that he got in trouble for, that Diddy got in trouble for in jail, was using other inmates' calling number. Remember that? So he was calling witnesses in the case from jail using other inmates. That was a direct affront to that judge. That was remember, we had all those attempts at bail that were denied at the very beginning of the case, one after another after another. This judge, and it's the same judge who's going to sentence him, denied that over and over again. And you and I, again, in another conversation we had on your show, we both said he is screwed now, that he's got no chance because he's violating the rules of the court while in jail. So if he's disobeying the rules of the jail and the directive of the court while he's in custody, how can he be expected to actually follow the terms of a bail agreement when he's out of custody?
Right, right.
And I think that chicken is coming home to roost again. I mean, I think that's what happened yesterday afternoon. That any judge who has a criminal defendant who behaves like that is an affront to the court itself. It's disrespectful to the court. And it's almost like he couldn't get out of his own way there at the beginning. But he had an excellent defense team.
He does. So assuming for a moment, whenever the sentencing hearing happens, right? Let's say it happens in a month from now. Let's say it has October 3rd. The question is, what's his sentence? As we mentioned, the prosecution in a filing from yesterday talked about the guidelines range being 51 to 63 months. Now, this is before a pre-sentencing investigation and report. Now, the defense, right, they want 21 months. He's already served almost 10. Talk to us about what you're thinking here, because there is no minimum. The maximum's 10. If the judge were to combine it together, like you said, 20 years, feels highly unlikely that would happen. As we're talking, what is a pre-sentencing report investigation? How would it affect this? What do you think the judge is going to do? There's so many different factors to consider here, and it's not like a murder case when it's like, okay, we know what's going to happen. It's like life in prison without the possibility of parole. It's a given. There's room here. What do you think the judge is going to do?
So in federal court, this is actually very interesting. They rely very heavily on those pre-sentencing investigations. So essentially what will happen is there'll be a federal probation officer, and they do these for almost every case, where they will do their own investigation, where they'll talk to family members, they'll talk to employers, they'll talk to neighbors, and they will make a recommendation to the court as to suitability for release, suitability for time. And that's something that federal judges traditionally really adhere to. They tend to put a lot of weight on those, far more than they do in state court. The probation department can make a recommendation, but the DA will certainly have more ability, most of the time, to talk a judge in or out of a sentencing recommendation from the probation department. Federal court is different. They really put a lot of weight on those. So that's something that I think is going to be very interesting. And a lot of that will come down to what the individuals involved in that investigation, even though it shouldn't impact their professional recommendation. It's really, I think we're going to see what they thought of the case. Did they think he got away with something horrific here? Did they think that he was getting railroaded from the beginning? I think that may reflect in the recommendation to the court. But of course, we don't know what that is yet. I don't know. If I'm his defense lawyer, I'm kind of.
But their eyes are betraying a deep unease. Across the aisle, the prosecution sat like a wall of stone. They didn't need to speak. They didn't need to gesture. Their presence alone was enough to say, "We're ready." The judge entered, and the entire room fell into silence, so heavy it felt like a physical weight pressing down on everyone's shoulders. The sound of the gavel striking would seem to echo longer than usual. Formalities were handled quickly. No one was here for the small talk of legal procedure. Everyone was waiting for the words that would decide Diddy's future. The judge began with a summary of the case, their voice calm but unrelenting. They recited the charges, the evidence presented, and the testimonies heard piece by piece. They stripped away the celebrity persona, revealing the raw facts of the case. The language was clinical, but the impact was devastating. Each word was another chisel strike against the image Diddy had spent his life protecting. The gallery was full of people who had followed every twist and turn of this case. Some were there out of morbid curiosity, others for justice, and a few to witness the fall of a man they had once admired. No one.
I don't know if it is or not. So I can't determine what a judge is going to think. I don't think he would let that happen if he decided to make bail, but you never know. This judge was very fair to both sides in the trial. And as far as would he want to screw up what he, after being, the convictions not coming through, I think he got to be dumb to do something like that.
Right.
He is going to possibly get his life back. I don't know what's going to happen in the music world. I don't know what's going to happen in his regular life, but he's not facing the time that he was facing before that.
And I'm going to talk about sentencing a little bit later on. The private security, right, that would monitor
Yes.
him 24/7. The argument could be, and this is something the prosecution's put forward, how can we trust that he's not just they're not bought and paid for, they're not really going to watch him if he's hiring them, there's a conflict of interest there. What's your response to that?
My team is ex-law enforcement, all gentlemen that have been involved either in the Marshal Service, FBI, police, even some CIA. So again, my people would not risk their lives on something or risk their reputation or even possibly a criminal charge on something like this. So my guys are vetted. They've been doing this a very long time. So they wouldn't jeopardize anything like that. Now, when we first talked about private security, Puffy wanted some of his people. We denied that right away. It's our guys. It's my reputation on the line here. And that's when I went to court and Tony Rico and Mark Agnifilo both stood up and said, hey, Mr. Judelson is, his reputation's on the line here. He's been doing this a long time. I've bailed out Harvey Weinstein, Conor McGregor, Plaxico Burress, Cat Williams, Lawrence Taylor. So, I'm not going to put my reputation or my license in jeopardy, for X amount of money. To me, I'm going on. I might want to turn this business over to my son one day.
Yeah, the New York Times did a profile on you called "Bailing Out the Stars." How are celebrities different? How are they different from other criminal defendants?
More demanding. When you get the phone call from the lawyer or whoever, a publicist, anybody, it could happen in the middle of the night. A celebrity does not want to spend an extra minute incarcerated. And things change so drastically with, when I did Conor McGregor, he surrendered, he wanted out right away. Plaxico Burress, when that happened, we were talking and Mayor Bloomberg was involved allegedly in the situation, and Plaxico's bail went from X to X to X. And then I'm on the phone with his agent saying, hey, I need you to send me a copy of his deed for his place in New Jersey. And then with Dominic Strauss-Kahn, obviously, the world basically came to a standstill because he was the IMF, president, and nobody knew if he was on his way going back to Greece to lend him X amount of money, get him out of trouble. Yet we had to find him an apartment in the city. We had to get him private security. I was dealing with his
Moved. No one coughed. Even the sound of someone shifting in their seat felt intrusive. Then the judge's tone changed. The calm recitation gave way to something sharper, heavier. They spoke of choices, of patterns of behavior that could no longer be ignored, of the damage inflicted and the trust betrayed. They didn't speak to the man's fame or fortune. They spoke to his actions, to the people affected, and to the need for accountability. The words carried a weight that made it clear this wasn't going to be a light sentence. And then it came. The sentence. A number so large it didn't just make people gasp. It made them lean back in their seats, as if the force of it had physically pushed them. Some in the room exchanged looks of disbelief. Even those who came expecting something severe hadn't imagined this. The length of the prison term wasn't just a punishment. It was a career-ending blow. For a man whose identity was built on constant presence, on being in the mix, in the public eye, this was exile. Diddy sat still at first, as if his brain was refusing to process what he had just heard. His eyes stayed locked on the judge, but his expression didn't change. His lawyers shifted uncomfortably beside him, glancing at each other, their lips tight with,
them the time and not press them, because you don't want a probation officer or anybody in the federal system to feel like they're being rushed.
Right.
Because I think it's very easy to just go,
Yeah.
okay, screw it, the guy should stay in.
The prosecution made the
those
point
guys just
yesterday.
mean-
They said the point, like, we're not ready to give a really sentencing recommendation. We haven't gotten the report. There's people who say, well, maybe he'll get time served, right? He's been locked up. There's other people say, no, the judge is going to throw the book at him. Even though the judge said yesterday, even though I'm denying him bail and I'm looking at certain conditions, this is not reflective or a preview of what my sentencing recommendation or what my sentence will be. But, are we looking at double digits? Are we looking, you think, at 1 to 5 years, time served? I know it's so impossible to ask, but it is a very specific charges he was convicted of.
Yeah, we're not looking at double digits.
Okay.
I cannot imagine the court imposing that. And remember, because this law is so old, and we're in an age of Uber. So literally, somebody in New York City, a man or a woman who engages the services of a sex worker who lives in New Jersey, and if they pay for their Uber, that technically is a Mann Act violation. Okay, so it's a morality crime, and that it just does not carry the same weight.
Will the judge say, hey, listen, multiple instances he was doing it, not one Uber, he was doing it multiple times. You have 2 alleged victims here, Cassie, Jane, and violence, right? He used violence as one of the reasons to deny him bail. I wonder if he's going to look at, even though he was acquitted of racketeering and sex trafficking, different characteristics and components of his relationships with Jane and Cassie and say, this is aggravated.
It's a very interesting question. Can the court aggravate nonviolent offenses that he was convicted of, which are the Mann Act violations? Can he aggravate those when he was acquitted of the more serious charges, essentially acquitted of everything that involved violence, threats, all of that sort of thing? So It's a very, very interesting legal question.
Real quick, asset forfeiture. What is that exactly? How would it work with Mann Act convictions?
I just don't see the feds having it being on very strong ground to seize a bunch of assets. And here's why, Jesse. Most of the federal cases where you have, especially RICO cases, an actual RICO case is an actual corrupt organization that the purpose is, like I had one in Salt Lake City last year. It was a fraud case where it was one of these calling room scam operations. Every dollar that they made in that, they made out of the bank account of some poor innocent victim who got scooped up in their scheme. So every dollar, everything they bought, every car, every house, everything that they owned was a direct result of money that they gleaned from innocent people. Those are the cases, or narcotics. We see this all the time in narcotics cases where but it's the same principle. All the things that they have are a result of narcotics profits, right? So when you look at one of those cases, you're
unspoken words. And then slowly, the mask began to crack. His shoulders dropped. His breathing changed, slower and heavier. His gaze drifted down to the table in front of him. His jaw tightened, then trembled. A single blink lasted too long, and when his eyes opened again, they were glassy. The tears came quietly at first, slipping down his cheeks without a sound, but each one carried the weight of everything he had just lost. This was not the image the world was used to. This was not the confident mogul who had stood unshaken in the face of controversy. This was a man staring at the end of his freedom, the end of his career, and the end of the life he had built. No amount of PR, no clever statement, and no flashy comeback tour could erase this moment. The gallery watched in silence. Some were stunned. Some felt vindicated. Others were conflicted, seeing a man they had once cheered for now reduced to this raw, unguarded state. Even his harshest critics couldn't deny the human weight of what they were seeing. The judge continued speaking, outlining the conditions of the sentence, the restrictions, and the realities of what awaited him. But Diddy was somewhere else now. His eyes stayed down. His hands, once folded neatly, were now clenched into fists. His breathing was uneven. The bailiffs moved in. Their presence signals the transition from defendant to inmate. The sound of the handcuffs locking around his wrists was louder than it should have been. Or maybe it just felt that way. For decades, Diddy had lived in a world where rules could be bent, where consequences could be negotiated, and where money and power could buy time and space. That world ended with the metallic click of those cuffs. He stood, but not with the upright, commanding posture he had when...
At a certain point, you have to just, maybe it is a leap of faith, but you have to just give a person another chance. And he really is committed to change and to there being a new chapter of service on his part. So, I think we have to hope that the judge will agree with that. And I think we've made a strong case for that.
Do you know when the judge might make a decision on bail?
We don't know.
Okay. If he denies release again, does that give you a sense of what sentencing could be like? Now, to be clear, my understanding is Judge Arun Subramanian even said at the point, if I make a decision on release, it's not indicative of where I'm leaning towards sentencing. I know there's a pre-sentencing investigation still being conducted or has been conducted. There's a lot of factors to consider. But I have to ask about whether this is going to, have an effect on sentencing. Do you believe it's going to have an effect on sentencing? Does it give you a preview of where the judge is lining up? Because my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, you are probably going to be arguing for time served, maybe a minimum of 21 to 27 months. Where do you think the judge is going to go here?
Yeah, I think that you have to take each step at a time and that the judge is not going to prejudge that. There's a lot more information he needs to get, not only the pre-sentence report, but we're going to make a very fulsome sentencing submission. And he's going to have, a much more detailed picture. Even, the trial was about the charges, right? And he doesn't have the full picture of all the factors about Sean's life that he's going to consider. There's going to be a big fight about the sentencing guidelines. We think actually we're going to end up arguing for an even lower guideline range than we had originally believed at the time of the verdict, where we didn't have we had like a couple of hours to try to figure out what to say about bail. So, I hope the judge will grant bail, but I feel confident that even if he doesn't, it doesn't necessarily mean he's not going to sentence Sean to time served. He's going to take everything into account when he gets all the submissions. And, I've got a lot of confidence that the judge is going to be fair and not prejudge the situation.
And you also have this motion for judgment of acquittal, that the Mann Act convictions should be tossed out, Combs be granted at a minimum a new trial. Number of very interesting arguments that are present, and it's basically that there has really never been, as we talked about, a prosecution conviction on a Mann Act like this, that Combs wasn't profiting off of the business. There were all consenting adults that were involved. The jury didn't find that there was any sex trafficking, that this isn't even prostitution per se, it's more voyeurism, that the intent wasn't for people to travel for sex for money, but paid them for their time. They were all having a good time. There's a First Amendment argument that the freak-offs and the hotel nights were performances that were videotaped so he could watch them later. It's amateur pornography. There's an argument that he was prejudiced because of all the other evidence that came in to prove RICO or sex trafficking, but would never have come in if this was merely a prosecution for the Mann Act violations. Specifically, we talk about the Intercontinental Hotel footage. But couldn't the counter argument be, if you look at the text messages and voice notes...
He walked in. His head was down now. His shoulders sagged. His steps were slow and heavy. The cameras outside would capture his departure, but they wouldn't capture the change that had happened inside. The moment he realized there was no coming back from this as he was led away, the room began to stir. Conversations erupted in low voices. Some said it was justice. Some said it was too much. But all agreed they had just witnessed something historic. Not just the fall of a man, but the collapse of an image. The shattering of the illusion that certain people are untouchable. The reporters spilt out into the hallway, phones in hand, rushing to break the news. Inside, the air still felt heavy. People lingered as if they were reluctant to leave, knowing they had been part of a moment that would be replayed on screens for years to come. Somewhere, fans were watching in disbelief. Somewhere, former allies were reconsidering their connections. Somewhere, people who had stayed silent about their own encounters were feeling a shift, seeing proof that even the most powerful could be brought to account. And for Diddy, this was the beginning of a new reality. Not one filled with red carpets and flashing cameras, but with cell walls and locked doors. The man who once commanded stages around the world would now answer to prison guards. The man who built an empire would now live by someone else's rules. When history remembers this day, it won't be through his hit songs or his business achievements. It will be remembered as the day Sean Diddy Combs sat in a courtroom, heard a sentence that could end his career, and broke down in tears. Not because he didn't have power anymore, but because for the first time, power couldn't save him. This wasn't just the end of a chapter, it was the end of a book. And the next one, if there ever is one, will be written from behind bars.